Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today into psychedelic research,
Yeah.
specifically the legal and regulatory side of things.
Okay.
You're interested in how global frameworks work, how those connect to like receptor pharmacology
Yep.
and medical classification, and then the whole tricky path to actually using these things clinically,
Right.
plus the rise of new options that might be even safer. So no law degree needed by the end of this, but you will have some fascinating dinner party knowledge, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
To set the scene, you mentioned this isn't a brand new field, right? When did psychedelic research kind of first take off, and how did we even get to where we are today?
Well, the mid-20th century, so like the 1950s, saw a real boom in psychedelic research.
Hmm.
Scientists were exploring things like LSD and psilocybin for conditions like addiction, depression, and there were some promising results.
Okay, so what happened? Why did things kind of come to a screeching halt?
It's a little bit of a story of changing social tides and changing legislation. So the 1960s and 70s saw, a cultural shift, and concerns arose about recreational use and potential risks of these substances. And this kind of led to the introduction of the Controlled Substances Act in the U.S., which, under the DEA, classified psychedelics as Schedule I substances.
Schedule Y, that's the most restrictive category, right?
Yeah.
Like no recognized medical use and just high potential for abuse.
Precisely. And so this classification essentially choked research funding and created big obstacles for scientists who wanted to actually study these substances.
Wow, a real setback. So let's fast forward to today. What's the global legal landscape look like now? Is it still a complete lockdown?
It's a little bit more like a patchwork quilt.
Okay.
Different countries have different approaches. Some are more restrictive, some more open to psychedelic research.
Give us some examples. What's happening in places that are being more progressive with it?
Well, certain countries like the Netherlands have had a more tolerant stance towards specific psychedelics. In the U.S., we see a lot of this change happening at the state level. So Oregon, for example, has decriminalized psilocybin, and they've created a framework for its therapeutic use.
Interesting. So very different approaches. But here's where I think it gets really fascinating. Like the science behind why these laws even exist. What can you tell us about like receptor pharmacology and how that influences legal classifications?
Yeah, receptor pharmacology is really key to understanding how psychedelics work in the brain, and in turn, why they are classified and regulated the way they are. You see, these substances, they exert their effects by interacting with specific receptors in the brain.
Okay.
LSD and psilocybin, for example, mainly act on serotonin receptors, particularly the 5-HT2A subtype.
Right, the 5-HT2A receptor. What's its role in all this?
So this receptor is heavily concentrated in brain areas that are involved in perception, emotion, and cognition. And when psychedelics activate the 5-HT2A receptor, they trigger a cascade of effects that can lead to really profound alterations in consciousness. Things like hallucinations or changes in mood.
So is it those kind of intense psychoactive effects tied to 5-HT2A that make regulators so cautious?
Absolutely. The potential for such significant alterations in consciousness raises concerns, especially outside of, very controlled settings. So it's a delicate balance between acknowledging the possible therapeutic benefits, but also mitigating the potential risks.
Makes sense. But what if we could have the benefits without the trip?
Right. That's kind of the exciting new frontier, non-hallucinogenic analogs, compounds that retain the therapeutic potential but lack those intense psychedelic effects.
How does that even work? Is it possible to separate those effects?
Yeah, it's an active area of research. And there are some promising discoveries. For instance, MDMA has a unique pharmacological profile. So it interacts with serotonin receptors, but it also impacts dopamine and norepinephrine systems. And at therapeutic doses, it can induce those feelings of empathy and connection without the really intense hallucinations.
So could this lead to faster regulatory approval for MDMA, for instance? Less stigma for patients who might be a little hesitant to try it?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
The reduced intensity of hallucinations might make regulators more comfortable. And plus, for patients who are hesitant about the psychedelic experience, a non-hallucinogenic option could be more appealing. In fact, the MAPS-sponsored clinical trials with MDMA for PTSD have reached phase 3.
Wow.
And if those are approved, it could significantly change perceptions of MDMA and its therapeutic potential.
Phase 3, that's pretty far along. What are some other advantages of these non-hallucinogenic analogs? Any potential downsides?
Well, one advantage is easier administration in clinical settings. Without the need for intensive psychological support during treatment, the protocols can be a lot more streamlined.
I see. So it makes things more practical.
Yeah.
But you mentioned downsides.
Yeah, we still don't fully understand the long-term effects of these substances,
Mm.
so there could be some unforeseen consequences. And it's important to remember that even without the strong hallucinations, they are still psychoactive and require really careful handling. We need to be mindful of potential negative effects. For example, studies have shown that MDMA can cause hyperthermia and in some cases even psychiatric problems and hepatotoxicity.
Right. Safety first, always.
hmm
But even if the legal barriers kind of disappear and these non-hallucinogenic options prove safe and effective, are we even ready to use them in clinics? What about the infrastructure and training?
Yeah, that's a crucial point.
Mhm.
Even if laws change, there are significant clinical challenges. For example, we need proper patient screening to ensure that everyone receiving psychedelic-assisted therapy is a suitable candidate.
Right.
Not everyone is, especially individuals with certain pre-existing conditions who might experience some adverse effects.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Mm.
What about the therapists themselves? Are they equipped to provide this kind of treatment?
That's another hurdle. Psychedelic-assisted therapy demands specialized training. It goes beyond traditional therapy.
Okay.
Therapists need to have this in-depth knowledge of these substances, the potential psychological effects, and how to create a really safe and supportive environment for patients.
So it's not just about prescribing a pill. It's a completely different approach.
Exactly. And we also need to consider standardization of dosages, treatment protocols.
Right.
There's still much research needed to determine the best practices for using these substances for different conditions.
It sounds incredibly complex, and we're just starting to kind of scratch the surface here. What other factors kind of influence the legal and regulatory landscape of psychedelic research?
It's not just about the individual substances.
Mm.
We also have to consider different preparations of psychedelics.
Ah, good point. It's not all pure LSD or psilocybin. Can you give us some examples of these different preparations and why they matter from a legal perspective?
Yeah, so consider ayahuasca. It's a traditional brew used in indigenous ceremonies. It contains DMT, which is a potent psychedelic, along with other plant compounds that act as MAOIs.
Okay.
These MAOIs inhibit the enzyme that actually breaks down DMT, leading to a longer, more intense experience.
So in this case, it's the combined effects of the multiple substances, not just the DMT on its own, that complicates things.
Precisely. And different jurisdictions may have different rules regarding these traditional preparations, recognizing their cultural significance, but also addressing potential safety concerns.
Fascinating. How do cultural practices and religious use kind of factor into the legal equation?
That's a significant consideration. Some religious groups, like the Native American Church in the U.S., have exemptions that allow them to use peyote, which is a cactus containing mescaline, in their ceremonies.
So the law recognizes religious freedom in these instances, but I imagine there are still challenges.
Absolutely. There's this ongoing debate about balancing religious freedom with public health considerations and preventing abuse.
A delicate balance for sure. Yeah. Now, shifting gears a bit, you mentioned earlier that we don't fully understand the long-term effects of these substances. What kind of research is being done to address those knowledge gaps?
While scientists are conducting long-term studies, they're following people who've used psychedelics over extended periods to understand the potential long-term impact on their mental and physical health.
So really trying to get a clear picture of the risks and benefits over time.
Exactly. These studies are crucial for informing those policy decisions and ensuring responsible use. But beyond the research, there's another really significant factor, the economic landscape.
Interesting. How does the legal and regulatory environment impact, investment research funding?
Well, the legal status of psychedelics directly affects investor confidence and funding agency decisions. Those strict regulations we talked about earlier make investors hesitant to put money into an area with so much legal uncertainty.
Makes sense. It's risky business.
Indeed. And, research funding is often tied to government grants and policies, which, as we've seen, are heavily influenced by the legal status of these substances.
It's a bit of a catch-22. We need more research to understand these substances, but legal hurdles make securing that research funding difficult.
Precisely. But as more evidence emerges and the legal landscape shifts, we're seeing a surge in investment and funding opportunities. It's a sign that the tide is turning.
That's definitely encouraging. It seems like we've covered a lot of ground already, but I'm sure there's more to unpack. What can you tell us about potential future developments in psychedelic research?
Well, predicting the future is always challenging, but based on current trends in research, I think we can expect to see some major developments in the coming years.
Give us a sneak peek. What's on the horizon?
I anticipate more countries and regions easing restrictions on psychedelic research, at least for substances with strong therapeutic potential. This will lead to expanded clinical trials and more robust data on efficacy and safety.
So more research, better understanding, and hopefully better access for patients. But beyond just access, how do you see these therapies kind of evolving?
I believe we'll see a shift toward more personalized and integrated approaches to psychedelic-assisted therapy.
Okay, let's break that down. What does that look like in practice?
It won't just be about the psychedelic experience itself. We'll see these powerful tools integrated with other therapies like psychotherapy to maximize benefits and address those individual needs.
So a holistic approach that takes the whole person into account.
Exactly. And I think technology will also play a larger role. Imagine virtual reality being used to create immersive therapeutic environments or apps that track progress and support patients between sessions.
Wow, that's really pushing boundaries, combining ancient wisdom with cutting-edge technology.
It's an exciting time to be in this field. There's so much potential to alleviate suffering and help people live richer, more fulfilling lives. But it's crucial to proceed with caution, prioritizing scientific rigor, ethical considerations, and the well-being of patients above all else.
Absolutely. A delicate balance, but with immense potential rewards. You know, this whole concept of receptor-targeted therapy has really struck me. It seems like a paradigm shift in how we approach mental health treatment.
It is. Instead of simply addressing symptoms, receptor-targeted therapies aim to understand and modify the underlying biological mechanisms that contribute to those mental health conditions.
Like going upstream to fix the source of the problem instead of just patching up the leaks downstream.
A perfect analogy. And psychedelics, with their ability to modulate specific receptors, are at the forefront of this revolution.
It makes you wonder, could psychedelics be the key to a whole new era of mental health treatment?
They certainly have the potential to be a significant part of that future. However, it's important to remember that they are not a panacea. They're powerful tools that need to be used responsibly and integrated into a comprehensive approach to mental health care.
Okay, a lot of potential, but with a need for measured expectations and careful consideration. We've covered so much ground already, and I'm eager to hear more. What else can you share about the complex interplay between scientific advancements and the legal landscape surrounding psychedelic research?
One crucial aspect to consider is the evolving perception of risk and benefit associated with these substances.
Ah, that makes sense. Public perception plays a huge role in shaping policy.
Yeah.
What's changing in that arena?
Well, we're seeing kind of a shift away from those fear-based narratives that dominated the past.
Good.
More people are becoming aware of the potential therapeutic benefits of psychedelics, thanks in part to, increased media coverage and just the growing body of scientific evidence.
So a more nuanced understanding is emerging.
Exactly. People are recognizing that while risks exist, they can be mitigated with, proper screening, controlled settings, trained professionals.
So it's about harm reduction, not just prohibition.
Precisely. And this shift in perception is starting to influence policymakers, regulators. We're seeing a willingness to reconsider some of those outdated laws and explore new regulatory models.
That's really encouraging. What do some of those new models look like?
Well, some advocate for a system similar to the one used for cannabis in some places, with regulated access for medical and potentially even recreational use. Others propose creating these special licensing and training programs for therapists and clinics that are offering psychedelic-assisted therapy.
So different approaches are being explored.
Yeah, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. The optimal model will likely vary depending on the specific substance, the intended use, and the cultural context.
I imagine international collaboration also plays a role in shaping the legal landscape.
Absolutely. We're seeing increased collaboration among, researchers, policymakers, and advocacy groups across borders, sharing knowledge, best practices, regulatory frameworks. All of that can accelerate progress and foster responsible innovation.
It sounds like a truly global effort. But with all these advancements, what about the ethical considerations?
Yeah, ethics are paramount in psychedelic research and therapy. Ensuring informed consent, protecting vulnerable populations, preventing exploitation are all crucial.
So how are researchers and policymakers kind of addressing those concerns?
Ethical guidelines are being developed, and institutions are implementing these rigorous review processes for research proposals. There's also a strong emphasis on cultural sensitivity, especially when working with indigenous communities and traditional practices.
It sounds like there's a real commitment to responsible development and use. Now, you've mentioned the therapeutic potential of psychedelics a couple of times. Can you elaborate on some specific areas where they're showing promise?
Certainly, clinical trials are investigating psychedelics for a wide range of mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, addiction, and PTSD.
Can you give us some specific examples of how these substances might be used therapeutically?
Yeah, so for example, psilocybin-assisted therapy has shown really remarkable results in treating treatment-resistant depression. Patients often report profound insights, emotional breakthroughs, and, really long-lasting reductions in those depressive symptoms.
So it's not just about managing symptoms, it's facilitating like deeper healing.
Exactly. Psychedelics can help people confront those deep-seated traumas, reframe negative thought patterns, and develop a more compassionate relationship with themselves.
It sounds like a very different approach compared to like traditional therapies.
It is, and that's why it's so important for therapists to have, that specialized training. They need to be able to guide patients safely and effectively through those intense experiences.
What about MDMA? You mentioned earlier its potential in treating PTSD.
Yes, MDMA-assisted therapy has shown incredible promise for individuals struggling with PTSD. The unique properties of MDMA allow patients to access and process those traumatic memories without being overwhelmed by fear or anxiety.
So it kind of creates a safe space for healing.
Exactly. It helps patients revisit those painful experiences with a sense of compassion and understanding, allowing them to integrate those memories and move forward.
It sounds like there's a real emphasis on personalized care in psychedelic-assisted therapy.
There is. The therapist works very closely with the patient to understand their unique needs, tailor that treatment plan, and provide, ongoing support throughout the whole process.
Okay, so we've explored, a range of legal, scientific, ethical considerations. What can you tell us about the kind of practical challenges of integrating psychedelic therapies into, mainstream healthcare?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is access. Currently, clinical trials are limited, and the regulatory hurdles often make it really difficult for patients to access these therapies.
So even if a treatment shows promise, getting it to those who need it can be a major obstacle.
Absolutely. We need to kind of streamline the approval process, expand that clinical trial capacity, and train more therapists to meet that growing demand.
What about cost? Are psychedelic therapies likely to be affordable and accessible to everyone?
Yeah, cost is a major concern. Currently, these therapies are often quite expensive, due to the specialized training required for therapists, the controlled settings needed for treatment, and just the general lack of insurance coverage.
So affordability is a big barrier.
Yes, and addressing this issue is essential if we want to make these treatments accessible to a wider population. Advocacy groups are working to raise awareness and lobby for those policy changes that would make psychedelic therapies more affordable.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done, both in terms of research and policy. But despite those challenges, I'm sensing a lot of optimism in the field.
There is. We're witnessing a paradigm shift in mental health care, and psychedelics are playing a really key role. The potential to alleviate suffering and improve lives is immense. And, that's incredibly motivating.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about the future of psychedelic research. What exciting developments do you kind of see on the horizon?
The future is full of possibilities. We can expect to see ongoing advancements in drug development leading to those new and improved psychedelic therapies with fewer side effects and more targeted applications.
So even more precise and effective treatments.
Yes, and I think we'll also see a greater emphasis on personalized medicine, where treatments are tailored to the individual's specific needs and, genetic profile.
Fascinating. Anything else that's particularly exciting?
We're on the cusp of a technological revolution in mental health care. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are being used to develop personalized treatment plans, predict treatment outcomes, and even create those virtual reality experiences that can enhance therapy.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like we're entering a whole new frontier. But with all this progress, are there any potential risks or unintended consequences we should be aware of?
There are always risks associated with any new technology or medical treatment. It's crucial to proceed with caution, prioritize safety, and ensure that, ethical guidelines are being followed.
So responsible innovation is key.
Absolutely. We need to balance the excitement and the potential with a healthy dose of, realism and careful consideration.
That's a good note to end on. This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the legal and regulatory landscape of psychedelic research. But before we wrap up, I want to give you, the listener, one final takeaway.
Please do.
This is a rapidly evolving field with immense potential to transform mental health care. But it's crucial to stay informed, engage in that thoughtful dialogue, and advocate for responsible policies that prioritize patient safety and access.
Well said. Yeah, a real deep dive.
We've covered so much ground, from the history of psychedelic research and the legal hurdles to the science of receptor pharmacology and even the promise of non-hallucinogenic analogs. And we even peeked into the future of what psychedelic-assisted therapy might look like.
Right. And through it all, we've kind of seen how these global legal frameworks are intertwined with the science and then the challenges of actually bringing these treatments to people who could benefit from them.
Something that really struck me throughout our conversation is how this goes beyond just changing the laws, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a totally fundamental shift in how we even think about mental health.
It is, yeah. We're not just talking about new medications, we're talking about a new paradigm.
Totally. It's about recognizing that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, right? It's about integrating different types of therapies, personalizing treatment, and really empowering individuals to take an active role in their own healing.
Yeah. And within that framework, psychedelics offer this, very unique tool.
Yeah.
And their ability to facilitate such profound experiences and potentially promote neuroplasticity kind of opens doors that some of the traditional therapies just can't.
It makes you wonder if we're on the verge of a mental health revolution.
I think we are seeing the beginnings of a real shift, yeah. But just like with any revolution, it's crucial to proceed thoughtfully, responsibly. We need the research, the ethical guidelines, and a real focus on patient well-being, first and foremost.
So, listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you should walk away thinking about?
I think just remembering that the world of psychedelic research is always changing, scientific discoveries, evolving legal landscapes, changing societal attitudes. These are all these forces kind of shaping the future of how these powerful substances are used, to alleviate suffering and ultimately just improve lives.
It really is complex and fascinating, and it's moving quickly.
Yeah.
And you, listener, have a role to play. Stay curious, stay informed, and engage in the conversation, because the decisions made in the next few years will determine how this new era of mental health care unfolds.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those fascinating dinner party conversations going.